thank you so much. And Sarah, thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored to be here. So thank you. And thank you, Mary and Barbara. I'm glad you're here. So I think and I think, you know, what I'll do just for a few seconds here is talk a little bit about how I got started writing this book. And I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint. And it's really, honestly, this PowerPoint is actually not a PowerPoint. It's just a series of pictures that I wanted to show you that the characters in my novel are actually based on. One of the things is I just totally believe that you each have a story that deserves to be told. Okay. Cynthia and Barbara and Mary and Sarah, you all have family stories that if you don't tell the story, nobody's going to tell them. Okay. And as Barbara has found out, it is hard to try to sit down and actually write it out. So you really have to, you really have to slice out some time to do it. So this picture right here, and this is really where it all started. My aunt gave me this picture, and this woman is Harriet. And if you've read the novel, Sarah, you've read the novel. This is the woman who dies in the very first chapter. Okay. And so what I knew about her, what my aunt told me about her long after I got this picture, was that she died, she committed suicide. And that just totally made me wonder what happened. Okay. And so I did some research. I found out that she had married a man that was much older than her, that her first husband went off and fought the Civil War and never came back. But then there were in the family, there were rumblings about that there was a man in her life besides her husband. And so it occurred to me the possibility existed that her original husband might have come back. So that's kind of how the ball got started rolling on this story. So these are the two books, and then there's a third one. So it's a trilogy that this whole family saga ends up being. This right here, Sarah, this is Otto. This is the father of Annie Laura. And Otto, this is the real Otto. He was actually a Prussian soldier. He was also a medic in the Franco-Prussian War. And then this is his wife. This is Annie Laura's mother. Now, this picture I didn't get for a long time, because what I really had was this right here. This is a picture of my grandmother. And I always, my grandmother had this picture of herself in the hall, and I always thought that this little girl just looked so sad. And I couldn't figure out why she looked so sad. And my mother told me that she'd had a really sad life, that she was illegitimate. Now, I heard that in my teen years, but I never understood what it meant, because I knew my great grandmother, I knew the woman who raised her, and I knew that her father had died. But it wasn't until much, much later, when I was in my early 30s, that I found out that, in fact, the woman I thought was my great grandmother was not my great grandmother. So this is the baby, Sarah, that is given to John Sebring and Mary Scarlett at the end of the book. Okay. And this is actually my grandmother. So later, whenever I was trying to find out who my real great grandmother was, it took me 7 years to discover who she really was. And I went, this is back in 2002 to about 2009. And I went to libraries. Of course, this is before genealogy and ancestry.com were really big. And I did a lot of archive diving, and my husband and I went to a lot of graveyards and asked a lot of questions, but nobody could give me an answer about who my real great grandmother was. Now, it was weird to me because it was in Chipley, Florida. Okay. And so I just thought, somebody's got to know something. But finally, my aunt told me that I just needed to stop snooping. Okay. Well, when she told me that, I thought, oh, okay, there's a real story here. This is actually a picture of my mother, who was the daughter, of course, of my grandmother, who was the illegitimate child, and my mother's brother and sister, and her other brother. This is Harriet. Again, this is the woman who died at the very beginning. These are my grandparents. And in Annie Laura's Triumph, which is the first, the second book in the series, which Barbara, you've already read. This is the Annie Laura's Triumph is organized around their wedding. And the story of Annie Laura's Triumph is that my grandfather was off working the mills. He was a forester, a sawyer in Alabama, and he was in debt to the company store, which was very common. They charged a lot of money for crackers, a lot of money for food. And these young men would be out in the woods and they wouldn't be able to get money anywhere else. And so they would be in debt to the company store, and it was virtual slavery, basically, is what it was. And so in Annie Laura's Triumph, my real great grandmother goes and sort of rescues them so that he can show up and be there for his wedding day. And this is actually a picture of them on their wedding. This is an example of the iron stove, Sarah, that my great grandfather built. So this is a German stove, and you can see the artistry on this stove. And you can understand, it helps you understand why being an artisan was so important to him, because he was an artist and he believed that farmers were peasants, and so it's pretty clear why. This is actually a picture of my great grandmother when she was an infant. She was born in Germany. They came to America in 1882. She was almost 9 years old whenever they came here. And this again is my grandmother on her wedding day. And there's my grandparents. This is James and my grandmother when they were in their 40s. So, and then this right here, this is John Sebring, Mary. That's who ends up, Sarah, who ends up with the baby. This is actually the baby, Laura Viola in the story, but her real name is Esther Lee. And then this is Mary Scarlett. And this is on the front porch of their house. I call it Anderson, but it's actually Southport, Florida. And there's my grandmother with her best friend. This is the well, and this figures in Annie Laura's Triumph. I knew my entire life, this is a story that came down to me, that a man dangled my grandmother over a well and pretended like he was going to drop her. And so my grandmother was petrified of water her entire life. And that's the picture of the sort of well that she was dangled over. In Annie Laura's Triumph, it's actually her father who dangles her over the well, her birth father. This is my great grandmother's mother. This is the mother of Annie Laura in the book. She dies in childbirth in the book, and that was probably actually what happened. And this is Otto, the father, who disappeared. And we actually have his diary, which is kind of, really lovely. These are the last 2 pages of his diary, and you can see that he liked, he was a medic. And so these were his recipes, okay? And here are some of the things that he wrote down that he'd like to believe. All right, so that's all. I just wanted you guys to see kind of where that story started, and the family pictures that inspired my desire to unearth and uncover the story of my great grandmother.
You did a lot of research.
Yes. I did do a lot of research, but I will tell you what happened. It took me 7 years, and I never discovered who my great grandmother was, but I left a query on, it was genealogy.com back then. And it was 7 years after I left the query that I got a telephone call. And it ended up being a cousin that I didn't know, who said, I have a story that you need to hear. My grandmother told my mother a story, and she told me to promise to never tell this story to anybody, but I am getting close to death. I mean, she was in her late 80s, and I want you to know this story because I know you will write the story, and I need you to know this story. And so, it was like, oh my gosh. So she came over, she brought her daughter over, told me the whole story that ends up being written in Annie Laura's Gift. And the majority of the story is true. I mean, obviously I had to fictionalize some of it because, there were certain details that I just couldn't that I didn't know. But I gathered most of that from family stories. My dear, wonderful cousin is the one who did the most research, and she put all of that genealogy together. And then she gathered all the cousins from that side of the family um, um, at a family reunion. And I was able to go around and talk to all these family members. And the elderly family members were able to tell me stories about my great grandma. They actually remembered her and knew her. And we gathered pictures of all of her, everything that had to do with her. Like she's the one, the pictures that I just showed you of her mother, and she had cut out flowers to go around that picture. And that was, my great grandmother did that. So, but I mean, she was what a woman. And after I heard her story, it took me almost 10 years to write the story, and it didn't get published till 2021. So.
Was it 10 years from the last one? Or
No.
was the
So
was
Triumph was 2016. Yeah, it was so 5 years from the last one.
Okay.
But I actually wrote Annie Laura's Gift first, but it was such a convoluted mess because I was getting these stories, kind of one after the other, and I would write it, and then I would get another story from somebody who knew her, and and then then I had to change it. And my cousin Sandy, did all of this research, and she would uncover, a deed, or she would uncover a court file, or she would uncover, that sort of changed, the story. And so it took me about, 2009 to 2021, or well, 2000. Mercer actually had the book in 2018. And it took them 3 years to go through the editing process and all that. Yeah. It was a long process.
It was a really enjoyable read. It was one where I always love books where I stay up late. Like, okay, I have to find out because you're immersed in the world. And this is one of them. So definitely look forward.
Thank you, Sarah.
So how do you decide which fictional elements to add into the story and what direction that fictional element's going to take, especially since it's about your family?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And fortunately for me, and just to answer this first question, I changed the names of the characters, okay? And the people of that generation have all passed. So this was, 1888. And this story goes, Annie Laura's Gift goes from 1888 to actually 1900. All right. And, all of those, everyone who was alive during that time has passed. And so that gave me a little bit more freedom in the writing of the story. As far as what to fictionalize, like I was telling Barbara, a story has to have a yearning. A character has to have a yearning, and a character has to change in order to, what the character thinks she wants is not always what the character really needs. And so I had to take all of that mess of things that had happened and turn it into this one character who was yearning. She thought for land. She thought she was yearning for land, and she was. I mean, it made her a part of the American dream, basically. But what she discovers is that she needs people more than she needs land. And it's a lesson that we all learn, really, that it's people who are important, not our jobs, not our fill in the blank. It's people. It's our people who are important. And so that was kind of so I had to organize the story around that, and then fictionalize whatever I needed to fictionalize in order to make that happen.
And family secrets thread throughout, even Miss Harriet's secret and Annie Laura's secret. What kind of draws you to centering novels around the secrets?
Yeah, so that's a really good question too, Sarah. And I think probably because this was a big secret in my family. Some people knew the truth and didn't want to tell me the truth. I had a cousin that I connected with, and he knew the truth. And did not want to tell me. And it was because he was the direct descendant of sort of like the villain. Okay. And so understandably, understandably, right? And so I think secrets, um, I think secrets, we love a secret, right? And secrets are intriguing because they send us on a quest, and we're on a quest for an answer to those secrets. And a lot of times, there are times when, that quest for the secret turns up things that you really don't want to know. But in this case, my quest for this particular secret turned up a hero in my family that I had not known
Did
And
people suspect you were going to write about it since you teach creative writing?
Well, it's funny, Barbara, because I actually started. I taught literature. My PhD is actually in Shakespeare, and so I taught literature for a very long time. And then when my children got into middle school, I realized that I needed to stay home because they needed me there during middle school. Um, and when I was home, I thought, I thought like everybody else, I thought I'll just write a novel, right? So I started writing. I thought, know a lot about teaching literature. I know nothing about writing a novel, okay? Because writing a novel and reading a novel are two completely different things. And so that sent me on a journey. I went back while my children were in school during the day. I would leave, I would put them on the bus, I would drive to Tallahassee, and I was taking a creative writing class in Tallahassee. And then I would drive home before they got off the bus. And then they hired me in Tallahassee to teach a short story class. And then to finish my PhD. And so I was doing the same thing. And so I ended up taking creative writing classes. And the first novel I actually wrote was for a NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. And I did the 30-day thing just to see if I could do it, and I did it. And then I wrote a few other novels. I got my first novel published in 2012, by Harlequin. It was a historical romance, and then I wanted to write something that my children that would help my children be better people, that would teach them the wisdom that would pass down in some way, the wisdom that my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother had passed down to me. And so I wanted to write something a little bit more serious for a literary press. And so then I pitched a book to Mercer. And the first book I actually pitched was Annie Laura's Triumph, because I knew Annie Laura's Gift wasn't ready. And so I pitched that book, sold that book to Mercer, and then a few years later, Annie Laura's Gift. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question or not, Barbara. That was a long.
Yeah, you did.
This also ties in with kind of family history, is that you kind of have a hot chocolate recipe, a hot cocoa recipe that pulls up several times, and even Annie Laura's mother makes it and gives it to Morris, who Annie Laura as her friend in the novel, and it's a divine delight. I probably had to make a cup of hot chocolate afterwards, but I was wondering if there was some family recipes that you have had passed down and you treasure, and if that was at all tied in.
Well, it's funny because that's a special thing that we do every Christmas in my family, and that's make homemade hot cocoa. And all I use is what my mother used, which is the Hershey's cocoa box. That you then boil the milk, and then you pour the we actually boil water. Pour the cocoa in. You stir it up, and it makes really thick, lovely chocolate. And then you pour the sugar, and then you pour the milk in. And so, but I knew that cocoa was really a German. I wish that I had that German recipe. I don't. But that hot cocoa really is a family tradition in my family. So yeah, that's funny that you should ask that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just curious because it is something that we pass along, like photos. I think I have a pumpkin pie recipe that is definitely my great grandmother's. It might be my great grandmother's, but I'm not sure.
Nice.
Which then I went researching this. I was like, okay, when did pumpkin pie become popular? And it was like around that Civil War era, it was becoming more and more popular. But even earlier than that, pumpkin pie,
Interesting.
which I
Sarah,
thought was
interesting. Yeah, that's a treasure. You know, my the woman who raised my grandmother, of course, Mary Scarlett, was exactly like Mary Scarlett in the book. The Mary Scarlett, my grandmother, her name was Sarah Elizabeth, but she was just like this woman. I mean, she truly started a sewing store out of a box from the Sears and Roebuck catalog, and she literally um, opened that sewing store in Southport and then moved it to Panama City and actually had a sewing store in Panama City. And she was a workwoman. My grandmother, you know, told stories about being 3 years old and washing the dishes because my great grandma, who was really my great aunt didn't want to do any of that housework. She didn't have time for it because she was, you know, basically supporting the family because her husband, John Sebring, was really sweet, really fun, really hippie, but he wasn't bringing any money. So anyway, so all that to say that my grandmother was a wonderful cook. But that's about as far back as we would get recipes on that side of the family would be from my grandmother, not from my great aunt.
And speaking of the sewing, and I know you personally enjoy sewing and quilting, but sewing and quilting did come up in the novel. So I didn't realize that it definitely was a tie to the family for historically. Have you been able to find more details or?
Oh yeah, that's because that's one of the things that I asked you know, whenever I met the rest of the family. And what I found out was what's true in this novel, and that is that Annie Laura was working in the fields, and so literally she didn't do sewing, but her sister did. And her sister had the sewing machine and, you know, kept that. But my great grandmother, I have some of my, well, it's my great aunt that I call my great grandmother because she raised my grandmother. I have a quilt of my great aunts. I have those baby clothes that I talk about, those hand embroidered baby clothes. My great aunt did all of that. That part is all true. And I have one of those baby gowns that she did. She was actually, you might remember this, Barbara, I don't know, but when I was teaching at Gulf Coast in 2002, we had a Women's History Month celebration, and we organized a women's handiwork from 1888 to 1940, and we actually held it at the museum at the what's now the, I don't remember what it's called, it was the Visual Arts Center, now it's the
No, it was the Visual Arts Center. It's now the Panama City Center for the Arts.
There you go, the Panama City Center for the Arts. Thank you, Sarah. That we gathered stories, and it was so cool because we had their handiwork displayed, and then we voice recorded the stories that went behind that handiwork. So people were telling stories about their grandmothers and their great grandmothers and the quilts they made and how they made them. So that was really fun. But anyway, so I was able to gather a lot of my grandmother's handiwork and my great aunt's quilt. So yeah, it's very important to me. Sewing is very important to me. My mother sewed and I sew and teach sewing, you know, love fabric, love what fabric makes you think and feel. And so yeah, so all of that is very important.
I wish I could see that exhibit. I'm sad that it's not documented.
I know, right? We tried it. We kept a website of it for a while, but then, you know, we just had to let it go. So I know, isn't that so sad? Me too. I wish we'd made a catalog of.
Oh, that would have been lovely.
Yeah.
And speaking of characters, Benjamin, who is Morris's brother and the villain of the story, is he really as horrendous as, there was no redeeming quality?
I know, it's really fun. I tried to give him a redeeming quality. I tried to give him a, you know, like the reason for why he acted the way he did. But yeah, no, that's pretty much true. That part of the story is true. And he actually, you know, he hanged himself in Dothan, Alabama in like 1912, I think. So it was dark. Yeah, it was very dark. And that was, you know, that was probably the hardest part to write about because, he does still have descendants. I mean, obviously,
Mhm.
we're all descendants. I'm his descendant. So, so that's the other thing that I had to keep in mind, that he is a villain, and yet he's my real great grandfather. So that's that's a tough one there. That's a tough one. So yeah. Mhm. But his sister, is who raised my grandmother, and that's true. His
Mhm.
sister, who I thought was my great grandmother, is really my great aunt. His sister raised her. So yeah.
I wonder if family secrets are going to begin changing a little bit because the taboos that were then aren't as much now.
I thought that was probably true, Sarah, but one of my very young students sat in my office and told me, that he doesn't, that his father doesn't know who his real father is.
Okay.
And that it's a family secret, and that
Mm.
that he's been doing some digging around, and I keep hearing these stories, Sarah. So I
It's
think it's
still going to
still
be.
there. Yeah, yeah. I think it's still there. But maybe let's hope that the shame is not carried by the woman. Okay, because that's
Mhm.
that was the horrendous thing, is that it wasn't her fault she was pregnant. She was raped, for heaven's sakes, and
Mhm.
yet she carried the burden of the illegitimate child, and my grandmother carried the burden of being an illegitimate child. And that was a stigma that in Panama City, Florida, you know, at First Baptist Church, that was not a cool stigma to have. Okay. So yeah, hopefully things change.
Probably remembered by all kinds of people too, of that generation.
Oh, absolutely, Barbara, absolutely. And that's why that picture I showed you of my grandmother with her best friend, they carried each other through a lot of storms. And I'm sure that her best friend protected her from a lot of gossip. Mhm. And that's, that the friendship circles in the book, the importance of Maggie, the friendship between Maggie and Annie Laura, and even Harriet, those women friends are what really sustained her. And then later, Martha and Mary, the Spencer sisters, who are they're my favorite characters. I just love them. Right. And they are based on true stories. That is a true story. Okay. They got the land over in Hard Labor Creek, and they raised a child. It was like, whose baby was it? They didn't care. It didn't matter to them, because they raised that baby. And they, talking about defying the odds, they defied the odds. So yeah.
Oh, I like that turn of the story.
Well,
It really allows like Annie Laura to kind of find herself as well.
and they maintain, in real life, she lived uh, uh, down the hill from Annie Laura, who was, really her name was Minnie Clara, but lived down the hill from her, and they were close, throughout Minnie Clara's life. So Annie Laura.
One of the things that came across was the atmosphere, the landscape. I felt like I used to live out in the country, and there was like saw palmettos, and it's a little rough out in the country in Florida. So you really seem to capture what it would be like in Falling Waters or Chipley, in that time period where things are not so manicured. And did you do any traveling or searching to kind of find?
Well, one thing that was kind of cool is that I was actually teaching at Chipola College during the first 2 years that I was writing that book. And so I got to commute every single day through the forest, right? So I would take
Mhm.
167, and I could see the cotton fields. I could see, and so I was able to see every season and exactly what it looked like outside during every season. So that was really a blessing. Mhm. But I did a lot of research also, just on the especially in the farming techniques, and what they would actually be farming, what uh, how the land would have been sold, all of that. Chipley actually had a newspaper that started in the 1880s, and so I was able to get a lot of information out of that Chipley newspaper. Yeah. Mhm.
Is most of the newspaper digitized, or did you visit a library for some of that research?
University of Florida, the archives at University of Florida, which are online, that's where I got the majority of the information from that Chipley newspaper. Yeah, the only time that we had to, in the second iteration, the first iteration I was just going to libraries. The second iteration, after 2009, the only time that we actually had to study paper documents was we had to go to the Vernon Courthouse and look at land deeds and land titles. And that's how we discovered and learned the story of that corrupt sheriff, because that was true. I mean, that sheriff really was corrupt, and he really did do dirty land deals. And so, we saw, like, in the book, there are all these erasures, like, things have been erased. And it's fascinating. And so then my cousin did further research and found out that, yep, that sheriff was corrupt. So yeah.
This is amazing.
Yeah, it was like one thing after another, after another, after another. And that, that series of horror, was also true that, the baby really was stolen. They never found their sister, their baby sister. That baby sister was kidnapped and taken away. They don't know what happened to her. And also, all of his equipment was stolen. And it was very soon after that he disappeared, went to Cottondale and never came back. And then there was news of his death. And so it's assumed that he probably committed suicide also.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of suicides. Yikes.
There's a lot of things I thought were fictional, but they were not. They were all part of your story. How do you approach the editing process?
So the first thing, I write a dirty draft. Dirty first draft is kind of what I call a dirty first draft. And after I've written that draft, then the first draft, then I'll go back and I'll revise it. And then I'm blessed with a writers group. Mark Boss and Tony Simmons and Carol Lappinson, Marty Sermons, Jason Kretzer, all of, we are just blessed to have a group of people that I meet with every 2 weeks. And so they slogged through the whole thing. And so then, I would do their editings, and then I would go back and then re-edit. And then I would I had 3 really good friends who read the book when it was completed. And then I edited based on that. And then Mercer took the book and it went through 3 huge edits with Mercer, because originally the book was all written in past tense, but the Mercer editor wanted me to write the part in the present, so 1898 to 2000 to 1900 in present tense, and everything before that in past tense. Now, let me just tell you, writing in present tense and trying to change all of the tenses, that took me about 8 months. So the book was a long time in coming. It took a really long time, yeah. And then even after that editing was done, there was a copy edit after that. They sent the book back to me, 3 times after that. So it probably, from beginning to end, the book is rewritten about 10 times at least.
On that question of editing, I've read that and heard that you do memoir more in present tense, but then I've also heard past tense because it was in the past. So since you've gone through all that, what do you recommend?
You have to decide what feels right. You as you're writing it, what's going to happen is you're going to find yourself writing predominantly in one tense. And when you go back and read your story, you'll see every once in a while you'll slip into another tense. But the tense that you primarily wrote it in, that's the tense you're probably going to want to continue writing in. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I know I know there's no right or wrong way of doing it. Okay. The story, will choose, actually the story will choose the tense.
With all of that editing and having to reread, do you ever get tired of the book before it's done?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, because if you think about it, oh, absolutely. I mean, because, and the other thing that's very problematic is I've written, since I started writing that novel in 2009, I've written 11 novels. Okay. Now, obviously, I've only published 3. So that tells you what the publishing world is like. You send them out there on a hope and a prayer, and most of the time they're dashed. And so, you got to go back to the drawing board. And so, really, especially those last few edits, it had been so many years since I'd written the book that I couldn't remember who the characters were. I had to, and again, even recently, I mean, I was just rereading the book before this, before this event today, so that I could remember what happened and who the characters were. Okay, because I've just finished a novel set in Scotland in 1333, so I can tell you a lot about that novel. This novel I had to reread so that I could remember it. So yeah, that's it. Do I get sick of it though? No. Ultimately, I don't get sick of it so much as I forget what happens. Yeah. Good question, Mary. Thank you.
Can you give us a little more taste of the Scotland book, just out of curiosity, or is that secret?
No, it's not secret. No, it's on an editor's desk right now. And so you can all pray and cross your fingers that the editor will buy it. That'd be awesome. So yeah, no, this is a book about a woman who's and I have this thing about parent bad parents, but I had wonderful parents, so I have all these like bad parents in my book. But she was this is during the war between Scotland and England, and she was a healer, a Scottish healer who was forced to heal British soldiers. And in the middle of one of the battles, she was able to escape. But as she was escaping, all the Scottish soldiers had been, like decimated. But she tripped over one that was actually alive. And she had to make this really tough choice. If I save this guy, I might die. But if I don't save him, I can't live with myself. So she ends up saving him. And so it's their story. That
sounds lovely.
That's the teaser. It's really fun. That actually is based on FamilySearch.com. If you ever go on that rabbit hole on Family Search, which is the Mormon family ancestry website, rabbit hole. But I traced an ancestor, and who I write about is actually an ancestor that I traced back on one of those rabbit holes. So that was really fun. And I read the story. I was like, oh, this would make a good novel, okay? Because the story was that it was the first Stuart king, actually. And his wife, there was an argument about whether they were actually married or not. So if they weren't actually married, then all the children were illegitimate, and then the Stuart kings were all illegitimate, and therefore, the Stuarts couldn't be on the throne. So I read that story. I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a great book idea. But of course, when you write for the press that I'm shooting for here, you can't actually write about real historical characters. So those 2 real historical characters are sort of side characters, and then the main character is just a female healer that I had to make up. So anyway, it was a really fun book to write. Really fun.
When you begin your writing process, are you more of an outliner or are you a discovery writer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to be a discovery writer. But I will say this, all writing is discovery writing. I am now and for the last several novels, I am an outliner. I outline the high points. I know where the novel, I start out with where the novel is going to begin and end. I decide what's going to happen in the middle, because what I found in my experience of writing, now 12 novels, that middle part can be really hard if you don't know where you're going. And a lot of times I'll write the first 30,000 words, and then I'll write the last 30,000 words. And then I'll go back and write that middle section, to figure out, because a lot of times you have to figure out what has to happen in that middle, right? So the middle is the mirror moment where the character looks in the mirror and says, okay, if I continue to act the way I'm acting right now, I am not going to get what I want. Or in order for me to get what I want, I've got to keep doing exactly what I'm doing. So anyway, so that's kind of the way it goes. Yeah.
Morris is a kind of a doctor as well, and he studies medicine, and he's kind of learning the new medicine of the time, like sterilization. And how did you do your research for that side?
Well, that was kind of interesting because I happened to be listening to a book on Audible about Dr. Lister and the remarkable research that he did as far as sterilizing instruments and washing your hands. And of course, prior to that hand washing, babies were dying, women were dying of peripheral fever because in the hospitals, the doctors were going from the morgue without washing their hands and delivering babies. And so the women were dying of peripheral fever, which is like, disgusting and really gross. And so this doctor was, and of course, the irony for all of us women is this: the midwives had been washing their hands from the very beginning. Okay, they'd always washed their hands. They weren't idiots. All right, the doctors were washing their hands. Okay, and so the doctors finally figured out that they needed to wash their hands, and things got a whole lot better. So yeah, I did do a lot of research on the that Dr. Davidson. There actually was a doctor in one of those little cities, not Shipley, not Graceville, not Bluntstown, one of those small cities up there. I can't remember which one it was. Bonifay. There actually, I think it's in Bonifay. There actually was a doctor in Bonifay who had his own medicinal garden, and his diary is in the archives at for the state of Florida. You know how they have those history archives? And so he has a diary of all of the medicinal herbs that he was growing. So that Dr. Davidson is really based on a true character. So that was a lot of fun to research.
Maybe the Florida Memory Project, would that
Yes,
be?
it is the Florida Memory. It is part of the Florida Memory.
That's cool.
Yeah, the Florida Memory Project was wonderful help, really incredibly helpful.
Since you've still been writing through all of this, has the pandemic changed your writing habits or at all, or?
No, because my job has actually gotten harder during the pandemic. And so my full-time job, the job that pays the bills, we had to, like we were talking about earlier, I had to revise all of my syllabus and my teaching style and my exams and my websites and everything so that, my students could continue to learn, even though half of them were online and half of them, so no, it hasn't. If anything, I have written less during the pandemic than I've ever written in the last probably 20 years. So yeah. So the answer is yes, it did change my writing style because I haven't been able to write as much. I was really happy that I got a novel written in a year. Okay, that was like, yay. Okay.
Do you have any advice for new writers who are beginning?
Yes, I do. And it's the advice that my first really great writing teacher gave me, and that is pay yourself first. If you want to be a writer, you sit down and you write every single day, no matter what. You either do it the first thing in the morning, you do it last thing at night, you find out a time of day that you can do it, and you always do it no matter what. There's always going to be something that gets in your way that you should be doing, that that is important, that needs to be done. But if you'll pay yourself first, even if it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever, then you will end up writing.
Sounds like good advice.
There it
Good
is.
habits.
All right. Well, thank you.
Well, I've enjoyed this, Milinda. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm Mary, and we lost Cynthia and Barbara. And yeah, it's tricky. The internet, I know, can be tricky. But anyway, Sarah, thank you so much for having me. It was so sweet of you to invite me. And I really enjoyed it. I love talking about my book. So
we don't often get a book club with the author, so I was super excited. And I have been recommending it. So it was good. It was a lot of fun to read.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, you guys. You guys have a lovely afternoon and enjoy this beautiful weather. Oh my heavens. Yay.
It's perfect.
Well, I will enjoy reading the book even more having this background. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Barbara. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Have a good afternoon.